policing the police every single day, and doing what the Charlotte County Sun newspaper and local TV stations won't do every single day.
I'm Dave Champion. Lockdowns, stay-at-home orders, forced business closures, people being arrested by government for their disobedience. Is there a better way? What are we trying to accomplish? And are we going about that in the best possible way? Is there a wiser, smarter way to save lives? Let me start out by asking the people who are emotionally invested in making this situation seem the worst that anything could ever be, like sort of the viral version of the Nazi death camps. If you're one of those people and you recognize that you're very emotionally invested in that, I'm going to ask you to try the best you can to step away from that emotionalism as you watch this presentation and use more of your intellect and less of your emotions, because otherwise I don't know that it's going to make any sense. I also want to talk about percentages because I'm going to be throwing around some rough percentage figures. And what a lot of people like to do is they like to niggle about the details. So you present a principle and you present rough percentages to illustrate the principle, and then somebody will say, well, it wasn't 23%, it was 27%. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but the question is, does that difference invalidate the principle? And for the purpose of this video, as you're going to see, those little differences are not going to invalidate the principle. And lastly, before I get rolling, I want to address the issue of conflicting narratives. And what I mean by that is people are going to watch this, and especially those that are very emotionally invested in being right as opposed to perhaps factual. You can go out on the internet and you can find out any inaccurate fact, any falsehood. So for instance, if I were to say in this presentation, the sun rises in the east, you could absolutely go find a link somewhere on the internet that says the sun rises in the west. Let's not do that. I think a lot of people believe that what our goal is with all of these stay-at-home orders and lockdowns and self-quarantining and business closures, I think what a lot of people think we're trying to do is stop the spread of COVID-19. It's not. And if that, it's not the agenda, but if it was the agenda, then what we're doing is a failure because you cannot stop the spread of a virus. So that's not the goal because it's not realistic. What are we trying to accomplish then? Well, we're trying to accomplish what I'm sure you've heard of, which is flattening the curve. I've addressed that in another video, and I don't intend to get into the whole flattening the curve thing, except to explain briefly that the intent of flattening the curve is so that instead of having the virus spike by taking no community actions to try and slow it down, we have a whole bunch of people who need medical care within a couple of weeks, and they overwhelm the ability of the medical system to provide that care. The concept is if instead of having it happen like this, we can spread it out over a period of weeks, several weeks, then the people who need medical care will come more gradually and we can take care of their needs and send them home and get the next person in. So we are not trying to stop the virus. We are trying to flatten the curve. I do want to mention before I leave flattening the curve that the media is oftentimes painting a very false picture. And what they're saying is, oh my God, look, the number of virus cases is going up. And the inference or the implication, or sometimes they come right out and say it, is we're failing. That's just not true. When you look at flattening the curve, you still have a curve, right? It goes up and peaks and comes down, just like the spike does, right? The taller curve goes up fast and comes down fast. When we flatten the curve, it grows more gradually. But notice it grows. So when we hear people on the news saying, or giving the impression that we're failing at our goal because more people are getting the virus, that just simply isn't true. All right, so now that we understand what we're not trying to do and what we are trying to do, how are we going about that? Well, the approach that America seems to have taken, and to a good extent the world, is that we're saying, I'm just going to focus this on the United States for the sake of this presentation. What we're saying is, okay, so the better part of 330 million people, you need to not work. You need to not have any income. You need to stay home. Businesses must close. That's the way we're handling flattening the curve. And of course, I think even somebody who thinks the way we're doing it right now is really good will admit we are creating an economic nightmare. And let me explain what I mean by that. Best case scenario, because there's no Western economy that has ever shut itself completely down. So we don't know what the consequences are, right? So I think best case scenario, we are hurtling into an economic abyss and we have no idea what the consequences are going to be. Worst case scenario, if we continue on this path, when we come out at the back end, we're going to find ourselves in a depression that makes the Great Depression look like a walk in the park. And in fact, there are some within the community of economists who believe that if the United States continues on this path, we will have crippled our economy irretrievably, and we will have handed, for all of time, world economic dominance to China. Okay? Whether you agree with that, there are people within the community of trained professional economists who are predicting that will be the outcome. So really what we come down to is the best case scenario is really, really bad. And the worst case scenario is even worse. If we didn't take any of the measures we are taking now, if we allowed companies to open, people to go back to work, the economy to be healthy, what would happen? Well, clearly there would be a greater infection level, correct? I don't think anybody would argue that. The question is, what percentage of the U.S. population would be infected? So there's a couple of facts that we have to take into account when we're discussing infection rate. COVID-19 is no more infectious than the seasonal flu. However, because of its long incubation period where people do not know that they have contracted it and that they are infectious, it has a broader dissemination. Okay, so sort of like, virus for virus, this one is no more contagious than this one, but because of the way this one operates in the human body, it is going to be more prolific. Okay, a little clarification there. So in the 2019/2020 flu season, the CDC estimates that approximately, this is where we get into, please don't niggle with me about small details, approximately 13.5% of the U.S. population contracted the seasonal flu. 13.5%. Okay. So what would happen if we all went back to work, we all went about our lives normally? What would the infection rate for COVID-19 be? Nobody knows. We don't have enough experience with it to know. And it's one of those unknowable things. But let's just use a number and say 30%. Okay. So instead of 13.5%, 30%. Now, 30% is not everyone in the country, right? So we have this smaller subset of people who would get the infection. Then we have to take into account what the World Health Organization said, which is 80% of the people who get it will experience only, and I quote, mild flu symptoms, close quote. Okay, so of the 30%, 80%, we have to move those out because I don't think anybody's trying to stop people from getting the flu, right? We're not shutting down businesses to keep people from experiencing mild flu symptoms. That is not the agenda, right? Okay, so we take those 80%, we move them out of the equation. Okay, so now we're down to perhaps tens of millions of people as opposed to hundreds of millions. And again, I'm not sitting here with a calculator running through the exact numbers. I'm trying to illustrate a principle. So we have these tens of millions of people who they're the remaining, well, I'm going to call them 20 million because that sort of works with the 20% number. And again, this is to illustrate a principle. If we've got 20 million people who are not the 80% who are going to experience mild flu symptoms, then these people, that remaining 20%, the 20 million, they are going to experience either moderate flu symptoms or severe flu symptoms. Obviously, somebody who experiences moderate flu symptoms is not going to need to be hospitalized. So whatever percentage that might be, and we don't know right what that is, those people are not going to require medical care, so we can move them off. I'm going to say that's half of the 20% or half of the 20 million. So you've got 10 million that will have moderate flu symptoms and don't need health care. Then you've got the remaining 10%, or for the sake of this illustration, 10 million people who would require some level of medical care. It doesn't mean everyone has to be taken into the hospital and put on ventilators. That doesn't mean that. Okay, that's going to be a small subset of that remaining 10 million. Nevertheless, they're going to need contact with the medical community. They're probably going to need to go to the hospital. So we got 10 million. So we just went from 330 million, the population of the United States, down to the 10 million that are going to be seriously impacted by this, where their lives may in fact be at risk. Now, I don't think there's anybody who would say, oh, you mean it's only 10 million people whose lives are going to be at risk? Ha, what the hell? Let's rock this place. I don't think anybody's going to say that, right? But if we acknowledge we have to take steps, are we taking the right steps? And is there a wiser, smarter, better approach to take that will not leave our nation economically crippled on the backside? I believe there is a much smarter, wiser approach. Let me tell you what I think it should be. I think we should get all of the directors of government health agencies, state and federal, all 50 states and the federal government, to use like public service announcements, and they should present a cohesive message. And the cohesive message should be, look, if these things are true of you, you are the 10 million who are at high risk. If you are one of those 10 million who are at high risk, you need to self-quarantine. You need to self-isolate. Because the position we're in now is we're asking 320 million people to destroy the national economy to protect the 10 million. It should be just the opposite. The 320 million should be allowed to go about their lives, and the responsibility for not coming in contact with the virus should be up to the 10 million who are at high risk. Self-responsibility, right? Now, are there exceptions? There are exceptions to everything, okay? But one of the biggest objections when I've bandied this about with people is that these people at high risk, they would not be able to self-isolate or self-quarantine if they didn't have some sort of support. I mean, if you need food, right? If you can't go out and get food, then you're going to have to leave the house. Okay. And that places them at risk, correct? Okay. So we have a massive government. If you look at all the government employees, state, county, city, federal, I mean, I don't know how many millions and millions of people work for the government. And then we have the National Guard, and then we have the military, okay? This is a gigantic pool of public servants, okay? What we should do is create a program where these 10 million people who are at high risk, we make them responsible for their own well-being. What a novel concept, self-responsibility. If you fulfill or you have these elements in your life, you need to be responsible for not being in public, because if you contract COVID-19, you may not make it. So you need to be responsible for that. But of course, they could not do that. They would not do that if there wasn't some support structure. So what I'm suggesting is that the government put together a system where people could go, they could call, they could go online, and they could say, hey, look, I'm in a high-risk group. I'm self-quarantining. So I'm going to need support. Okay? This could mean ambulances now and again when necessary, which would be very infrequently, to take people to the hospital, food deliveries, and so forth. And basically, we would take the government And a lot of the things the government does, we can temporarily suspend. Take the DMV, for example. Okay? So if you need to renew your driver's license and the DMV is not open because the employees are tasked someplace else, all that has to happen is the governor has to make a public statement to law enforcement and say, look, you're not going to enforce these laws, and the courts are not going to follow through and try and convict anybody, so don't do that. Okay, we understand we're in a crisis. If somebody's driver's license is expired or their tags are out of registration, let it go for right now. Okay, and then you could retask all those DMV employees as part of this government public service support network to the people who have to self-quarantine or self-isolate. All right. And is there a precedent for this? Yes. I mean, in a smaller scale. But the governor of New York, Cuomo, he called out the National Guard to bring food to an infected hotspot so that the people wouldn't feel they needed to go out of their homes. Okay? So we have a system. Let me rephrase that. We don't have a system. We have a framework. We have a potential system. I think what it really boils down to is, can we stand this system up rapidly enough that we don't destroy our economy, which is exactly what we're doing today? I think it makes imminent sense that we let 320 million people who are not high risk go about their lives normally and salvage what's left of our economy, and we make the 10 million self-responsible for staying away from the rest of us. I mean, I don't understand why anybody wouldn't say that's a much better choice, because the 320 million people, they're not at risk of dying. So why don't we take the people who are at risk of dying, clearly identify them, make sure that they understand if these things are true of you, you are at high risk and you should self-quarantine and you should self-isolate. And go online, sign up for this, we'll make sure you get your food. There's all sorts of ways we can deliver assistance to the people who've made that decision. And I know people are going to get very upset with me when I say this, but if we did this public service announcement, coast to coast, cohesive message, and somebody watches this, or they go online and they're seeing this, and they say, okay, they just spelled out these things, you're high risk. Well, that's me. Okay? I don't care. I'm going to the store today. I'm going to my Rotary Club meeting. I'm going to my church. Whatever. Okay? Should 320 million other Americans pay the price and destroy our economy for that guy's boneheaded decision? I'm sorry, I just don't see it. I hope nobody takes this as intending to be heartless, because I don't. I'm not a big Trump guy. But Trump did say something that I agree with wholeheartedly. The cure cannot be worse than the disease. And I fear that that is exactly what we're rushing headlong into, that we're going to look back at this and we're going to say we destroyed our economy, which essentially means destroying the country. We destroyed our economy to protect this small percentage of people who we should have shifted the responsibility to them to protect themselves. Thank you for being here.
Exactly will stay open and what will close. We can tell you, you don't have to rush to the grocery store or to your favorite restaurant by Friday morning. They will stay open. Nightbeat's Brianna Ross joins us in the studio tonight to explain what's next. Brianna.
Well, here's just a small list of what will be open after the order goes into effect on Friday. You can go to the grocery store and order carryout. You can be outside, walk, bike, run, as long as you social distance. But there are several businesses who do not fall into the essential services and activities list who have to shut their doors. Jessica Nicefield says COVID-19 already hit her salon hard.
A lot of our clients have canceled. We haven't really had any new people calling.
But with today's executive order forcing her to close her doors, she's about to be hit even harder.
Honestly, I'm just glad that I have a good landlord that is willing to defer rent and not evict anyone. But with this order, it's literally just takes all the money out of the hairstylist pockets.
Hair salons are just one of several businesses that do not fall into the 16 categories the Department of Homeland Security lists as essential industries. Those essential industries include healthcare, transportation systems, financial services, and food. That means you can go to the doctor, go to the bank, and go to the grocery store. You can also worship with your church, do outdoor recreational activities like biking or swimming, take care of your pets, and care for loved ones and friends as long as you're following social distancing guidelines. But if you're out for reasons other than those or the additional exceptions Homeland Security lists, you could find yourself in some trouble.
In fact, we're going to be very serious about it. You know, the sheriff's office will educate people first, of course, if they find them. But if this starts to become a problem, they do have the ability to do a fine or potentially 60 days in jail.
Collier County Sheriff's Office says people keep calling them seeking direction about the order. They're asking that you don't call them for that. If you have questions about what you can and can't do, just go to the Wink News app. We have the full list there. Back to you.
NBC2 has live team coverage of the coronavirus. Tonight, Christina Mendez was inside this afternoon's Lee County Commission meeting, but we start with NBC2's Michael Raimondi. He's live to show you what people think about this new executive order.
Well, the governor laying down his strictest rules so far during this pandemic. So before you get in your car the next time, you need to think to yourself, is this essential? Do I need to leave my house? Because if not, you better be staying inside. Now, I talked to some people today in Lee County who think this order should have been given a few weeks ago.
I kind of knew that we were probably headed towards this direction, so I kind of prepared.
Cora Chapman is getting back to what she loves. She bought all this paint recently, assuming a stay-at-home order was coming.
Their numbers aren't as high as ours, so what are they doing that we aren't?
She has more time now to stay inside and enjoy things she normally doesn't have time for.
I don't know, you get to be creative.
She is happy the governor is now ordering people to stay home, but thinks it should have happened weeks ago.
I think Florida should have done this from the get-go, in my opinion. I think the increase in numbers is from the fact that we haven't had a stay-at-home order and a statewide shutdown.
Governor DeSantis says you can still go out for essentials like medicine, money, gas, or food.
I go grocery shopping and I come back, but I have to feed my kids, so I have to have groceries, so I got to go to the store. I feel like the fact that I have to go to the store, it kind of negates any sort of self-quarantining I do.
Melinda Edwards understands the need for people to stay home as much as possible, but she thinks counties should be responsible for these decisions.
I feel like there are definitely counties that have a higher percentage that definitely might be a little bit more beneficial for them to be shutting things down.
For now, the governor is ordering us to stay home for the next 30 days.
I think that it would just be beneficial. I mean, why can't we just stay inside for at least 2 weeks,
And that order will be going into effect early Friday morning. Reporting live in Lee County, Michael Raimondi, NBC2.
Hey, Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH. I am using any video here with under fair use if you have criticism, reporting, teaching, etc. And please donate. I do not make money from YouTube, and there are different ways to donate in the video links. Thanks.